little lamb chops. I'm so glad y'all are back with me today. Go on ahead, grab your glass of sweet tea, sit on down, and let's talk about this case. I do not know how it is November. I don't know how we got here. This year is almost over. I feel like it just started. I just want to apologize to y'all that I skipped last week. It was kind of a hectic week. I really wasn't feeling well, and it just didn't happen. Okay, I'm sure y'all can understand that. Did y'all see where we had escaped lab monkeys running around Mississippi last week? Now, if that ain't the most Mississippi bullshit I have ever heard, I don't know what is. Lord of mercy. Y'all, I finally got to go to a hockey game and it was so much fun. I had no idea how aggressive hockey is. It was my jam for sure. For sure. All right, y'all, let's get going. I'm recording a little bit later than I normally do, so I'm going to try to keep my brain functioning for you. Today we're talking about the West Memphis Three. The West Memphis Three are three freed men convicted as teenagers of the 1993 murders of three boys in West Memphis, Arkansas. We're going to start today by discussing the victims first. So, our victims were Steve Edward Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore, and they were the victims of this horrific attack. And these babies were in second grade. Little ones, and it is heartbreaking. They were all in Cub Scouts and they were best friends. It was so sweet. We're going to start first with Steve Edward Branch. He was the son of Stephen and Pamela Branch. His parents divorced when he was an infant, and his mother was awarded custody and later married Terry Hobbs. And these are names y'all are going to want to remember for later on, okay? Steve was 8 years old, 4 feet 2 inches tall, weighed 65 pounds, and had blonde hair. He was last seen wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt and riding a black and red bicycle. Steve was an honor student. Our second victim was Christopher Mark Byers. Christopher was the son of Melissa Defer and Ricky Murray, and I'm hoping I'm saying Defer right. His parents divorced when he was 4 years old, and his mother married John Mark Byers, who adopted him later on. And Christopher was 8 years old, 4 foot tall, weighed 52 pounds, and had light brown hair. He was last seen wearing dark blue jeans, dark shoes, and a white long sleeve t-shirt. Christopher's mother says that he was a typical 8-year-old boy and still believed in the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. Oh my goodness. And then we have James Michael Moore. He was the final victim. Michael was the son of Todd and Dana Moore. He was 8 years old, 4 foot 2 inch tall, weighed 55 pounds, and had brown hair. He was last seen wearing blue pants, a Boy Scout shirt, and an orange and blue Boy Scout hat. He was riding a light green bicycle. Michael enjoyed wearing his scout uniform even when he was at meetings. He was seen as the leader of the three boys. Bless his heart. Bless all of their hearts. When it's kids that are part of horrific crimes like this, like it gets me. So let's talk about the crime. On May 5th, 1993, the three 8-year-old boys were reported missing in West Memphis, Arkansas. The first report to the police was made by Byers' adoptive father, John Mark Byers, around 7 p.m. The boys were allegedly last seen together by three neighbors who had reported that they saw them playing together around 6:30 p.m. the evening that they disappeared, and seeing Terry Hobbs, Steve Branch's stepfather, calling them to come home. Initial police searches made that night were very limited, and they didn't really find much. Like, they didn't go out very far. I'm assuming because it was later in the night, but that's my assumption. Friends and neighbors helped search that night, which included searching where the bodies were later found. The next day, May 6th, police picked up searching for the kids again around 8 a.m. They did canvass all of West Memphis, but focused on Robin Hood Hills, where the boys were reported last seen. Even despite a shoulder-to-shoulder search of Robin Hood Hills by a human chain, searchers found no signs of the missing boys. Around 1:45 p.m., Steve Jones, a juvenile parole officer, found a boy's black shoe floating in a muddy creek that led to a major drainage canal in Robin Hood Hills. They decided to go ahead and search the ditch, which is where they found the bodies of the three boys. These babies were stripped naked and were hog-tied with their own shoelaces. For those of you that don't know what that means, their right ankles were tied to their right wrists behind their backs, and the same with their left arms and legs. Absolutely horrible. Their clothes were found in the creek. Some of it was twisted around sticks that had been thrown into the muddy ditch. Two pairs of boys' underwear were never recovered. Christopher Byers had lacerations on various parts of his body, and his scrotum and penis had been mutilated. That poor baby was tortured. The autopsy report showed that Byers died of multiple injuries, but Moore and Branch died of drowning and multiple other various injuries. I cannot imagine. I just can't imagine. So, at first, police suspected that the boys had been raped, but there was later expert testimonies that disputed that whole theory. But there were trace amounts of sperm found on a pair of pants at the scene. Prosecution experts claimed that Byers' wounds were made from a knife and that he had been purposely castrated by the murderer. Defense experts claimed that the injuries were most likely the result of post-mortem animal wounds. I feel like you'd be able to tell the difference, okay? There shouldn't be this much controversy around that. Police believe the boys were assaulted and killed where they were found, but there were some folks that believe that the assault was unlikely to have occurred at the creek. So there was a little bit of speculation on both sides of that. So let's talk suspects. There were three suspects in this horrific case. Jesse Miskelly Jr., who was 17 years old, Jason Baldwin, who was 16 years old, and Damian Eccles, who was 18 years old. So almost adults, okay? Baldwin and Eccles had a criminal pastor, y'all. I can't even talk. A criminal history, having been arrested for vandalism and shoplifting. Miss Kelly was known to have a temper and would get in fistfights at school. Eccles and Miss Kelly had dropped out of high school, but Baldwin made very good grades and was a very talented artist, so he had some potential. One of his teachers even encouraged him to go to college and study graphic design. That's interesting. Eccles and Baldwin were very close friends, but they only knew Miss Kelly from school, so they were not close to Miss Kelly. Honestly, they were just kind of acquaintances. Eccles' family was poor, and they would get like frequent visits from social workers because he rarely showed up for school. So there were some bigger issues there. He had a girlfriend, and they had run off and later broke into a trailer during a rainstorm. They were both arrested, but only Eccles was charged with the burglary. Eccles had spent several months in a mental institution in Arkansas, and then he was awarded full disability from the Social Security Administration. So, I mean, he clearly had some issues there. Dr. George W. Woods testified for Eccles' defense and stated that Eccles suffered from various mental illnesses characterized by grandiose and persecutory delusions, auditory and visual hallucinations, disordered thought processes, substantial lack of insight, and chronic incapacitating mood swings. So he had a lot of mental health issues there. At his death penalty sentence hearing, Eccles' psychologist reported that months before the murders, Eccles had claimed that he had gotten superpowers by drinking human blood. Which, okay then. At the time of his arrest, Eccles was working part-time with a roofing company and was expecting a child with his girlfriend that he had at the time. Early on in the investigation, the authorities briefly suspected two West Memphis teenagers as suspects, Chris Morgan and Brian Holland. They both had drug offense histories and had suddenly left to go to Oceanside, California 4 days after the bodies were discovered, so that was a little sketchy. Morgan was presumed to at least be casually familiar with the three of the murdered boys since he had previously driven an ice cream truck in their neighborhood. So he kind of had a route in their area, and so they were like, he knows them or had come into contact with them. When Morgan and Holland were arrested in Oceanside on May 17th of 93, they both took polygraphs. Examiners reported that both men's chart indicated deception when they denied involvement in the murders. During further questioning, Morgan claimed a long history of drug and alcohol use, along with blackouts and memory lapses. He claimed that he might have killed the victims, but then he quickly recanted that part of his statement. California authorities sent blood and urine samples from Morgan and Holland to the WMPD, but there is no indication that WMPD investigated Morgan or Holland as suspects following their arrest in California. So that's interesting. They didn't even dig into that. But hey, there is a lot in this case that I'm like, what were y'all doing? Okay, so buckle in. The relevance of Morgan's recanted statement would later be debated in trial, but it was eventually barred from admission as evidence. So let's talk about Mr. Bojangles here for a minute. There was a possible alternative suspect that was implied during the beginning of the Miss Kelly trial. According to the local West Memphis police officers, on the evening of May 5th, 93, at 8:42 p.m., workers in the Bojangles restaurant, located about a mile from the crime scene, reported seeing a black male who seemed mentally disoriented, as they put it, inside the restaurant's ladies' restroom. The man was reportedly bleeding and had he had like brushed his blood against the restroom walls, which is, I don't know what that's about. Officer Regina Meeks responded to the call, taking the restaurant manager's report through the drive-through window. That's weird, right? Why would you not go inside to take the report? By that time, the man had left and the police did not even go in the restroom that day. Okay, odd. The day after the victims' bodies were found, the Bojangles manager thought there could be a connection to the bleeding man found in the bathroom. So he reported the incident to the police officers, who then decided, hey, maybe we should check that out. Oh, nice of them, right? The man reportedly wore a blue cast-type brace on his arm that had white Velcro on it, which could have made it difficult to tie up and murder 3 young boys. So there's that. The manager gave the officers a pair of sunglasses he thought the man might have left behind, and the detectives took some blood samples from the walls and the tiles of the bathroom. The police detective testified that he later lost those blood scrapings. I would really love to know how or why so much evidence is lost by authorities. Like, not even just in this case, but like in general. I would really love, like, why is it just going missing? Because this is not the first case that I have looked into that it's like, oh, we lost that. That's crazy. A hair identified as belonging to a black male was later recovered from a sheet wrapped around one of the victims. So that's an interesting note as well. Let's talk investigation here for a second. So there were 2 police officers, Sadberry and Jones, who felt that the crime could be cult related. There was a fellow named Damian Eccles who had become a suspect because he had an interest in occultism. Officer Jones felt as though Eccles was capable of murdering children. They did interview Eccles May 7th, 2 days after the bodies were discovered. They gave him a polygraph and he denied any involvement. But the polygraph expert claimed that Eccles' chart did indicate deception on that. On May 9th, Detective Ridge interviewed Eccles, where Eccles mentioned that one of the victims had wounds to the genitals. So law enforcement took that knowledge as incriminating. Like, how would you know that? There was no physical evidence connecting Eccles, Baldwin, or Miss Kelly to the crime. The case progressed very little after a month, so the police continued to focus their investigation on Eccles. They interrogated him more than anybody else. Police did state that he was not looked at as a direct suspect, but a source of information. That's interesting. On June 3rd, the police interrogated Jesse Miskelly Jr. Authorities interrogated him alone, even though he had a reported IQ of 72 and he was a minor. Yeah, no, that not okay. Miss Kelly's father gave permission for Miss Kelly to go with police, but he did not explicitly give permission for his son to be questioned or interrogated. Miss Kelly was questioned for roughly 12 hours, and only 46 minutes of the two interrogations were recorded. Sketchy as hell. It didn't take long for Miss Kelly to recant his confession. He did cite like intimidation, coercion, fatigue, and veiled threats from the police. Miss Kelly specifically said he was scared of the police during his confession. He also claimed he did not fully understand his Miranda rights. In 1996, the Arkansas Supreme Court ruled that Miss Kelly's confession was voluntary and that he did, in fact, understand the Miranda warning and its consequences. Portions of Miss Kelly's statements to the police were leaked to the press and reported on the front page of Memphis Commercial Appeal before any of the trials began. Not long after Miss Kelly's first confession, police arrested Eccles and Baldwin. 8 months after his original confession on February 17th of 94, Miss Kelly made another statement to police. His lawyer, Dan Stidham, remained in the room and continually advised Miss Kelly not to say anything else. He did ignore his attorney's advice and went on to detail how the boys were abused and murdered. Stidham was later appointed to a municipal judgeship and has written a detailed critique on what he asserts are major police errors and misconceptions during the investigation. And that I find that interesting, but that he came out and spoke of it. So let's talk about Vicki Hutchison for a second. There was a lady named Vicki Hutchison who was a new resident of West Memphis. She would play an important role in the investigation. She did later recant her testimony, claiming that her statements were fabricated due in part to coercion from police. On May 6 of 1993, before the victims were found later the same day, Hutchison took a polygraph exam with Detective Don Bray at the Marion Police Department to determine whether or not she had stolen money from her employer in West Memphis. Hutchison's young son, Aaron, was also present, and he was such a distraction that Bray was unable to even administer the polygraph. Aaron was a playmate of the murdered boys, and he had mentioned to Bray that the boys had been killed at the playhouse. When the bodies proved to have been discovered near where Aaron indicated, Bray asked Aaron for further details, and Aaron claimed he had witnessed the murders committed by Satanists who spoke Spanish. But Aaron's further statements were like wildly inconsistent. Like it did not track at all. He was unable to identify Baldwin, Eccles, or Miss Kelly from photo lineups, and there was no playhouse at the location where Aaron had indicated. A police officer leaked portions of Aaron's statements to the press, which contributed to growing belief that the murders were part of a satanic ritual. I don't understand why so much of this case was being released. I don't understand that. June of 93, Hutchison agreed to put hidden microphones in her home during an encounter with Eccles. And then Miss Kelly agreed to introduce Hutchison to Eccles. So they didn't even know each other. During their conversation, Hutchison reported that Eccles made no incriminating statements. And police said that the recording was inaudible, but Hutchison claimed the recording was in fact audible. So two different stories there. A lot of contradiction. And as you'll see, a lot of this information does contradict itself, which is frustrating, On June 2nd of 93, Hutchison told police that about 2 weeks after the murders were committed, she, Eccles, and Miss Kelly attended a Wiccan meeting in Terrell, Arkansas. Hutchinson claimed that at the Wiccan meeting, a drunken Eccles openly bragged about killing the three boys. Miss Kelly was first questioned June 3rd of 93, a day after Hutchinson's confession. But Hutchison was unable to recall the Wiccan meeting location and didn't know the names of any other participants that were there. Hutchison later claimed she had implicated Eccles and Miss Kelly to avoid facing criminal charges for the theft and to get a reward for the discovery of the murderers. So basically, she admits like she was just trying to get out of some stuff, and I would assume that police were probably putting a lot of pressure on her too. So let's talk about the trials. Let's talk about that for a minute. Miss Kelly was tried separately, and Eccles and Baldwin were tried together in 1994. Under the Bruton rule, Miss Kelly's confession could not be used against his co-defendants, which is why he was tried completely separately from them. All three defendants pled not guilty. As far as Miss Kelly's trial goes, during the trial, Richards Ofshe, and I hope that I'm saying that correctly, an expert at false confessions and police coercion, testified that the brief recording of Miss Kelly's interrogation was a classic example of police coercion. Some folks have pointed out that each one of Miss Kelly's confessions were inconsistent with each other, along with like the particulars of the crimes as well. On February 5th of 94, Miss Kelly was convicted by a jury of 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. The court sentenced him to life plus 40 years in prison. His conviction was appealed, but the Arkansas Supreme Court affirmed the conviction. And then we're going to get into Eccles and Baldwin's trial. The weeks after Miss Kelly's trial, Eccles and Baldwin went to trial as well. The prosecution called Dale Griffiths, a graduate from Columbia Pacific University, as an expert in like cults, and occult stuff, to testify that the murders were a satanic ritual. During the trial, the defense team argued that the new articles could have been the source for Eccles' knowledge about the genital mutilation, and said that his knowledge was limited to what was on TV. So basically, like what had been leaked to the press is like the extent of his knowledge. The prosecution said that his knowledge was too close to the facts since there was no public reporting of drowning or that one of the victims had been mutilated more than the other. On March 19th of 94, Eccles and Baldwin were found guilty on 3 counts of murder, and they were both sentenced to life in prison. And then there was the aftermath. Hold on just a second, because I need a sip of water before we get into that. All right. It is a well-known fact that there is a ton of criticism with how the authorities handled the crime scene. Miss Kelly's former attorney, Dan Stidham, said that there was multiple substantial police errors at the crime scene. He even went as far as saying it was literally trampled, especially the creek bed. So they did not take care at all. The bodies had even been removed from the water before the coroner arrived to examine the scene and determine the state of rigor mortis, which allowed the bodies to further decay on the creek bank and subjected them to sunlight and insects. That's not how that's supposed to be done. Authorities did not even call the coroner until almost 2 hours after the discovery of the floating shear. Furthermore, they failed to drain the creek timely and failed to secure possible evidence in the water. So they lost some evidence. I do want to note that I did find some contradictory information on this part, but some have said that there was a small amount of blood found at the scene that was never tested. But then there's some that are saying that there was no blood found. So that's a drastically different contradiction there. Reportedly, police records were a mess. It was speculated that the small local police force was overwhelmed by the crime, which wasn't like anything that they had ever investigated before. That wasn't something that was a common occurrence there. Police refused an unsolicited offer of assistance from the violent crimes experts of the Arkansas State Police, and some critics believe that it was due to WMPD being under investigation by the Arkansas State Police from the suspected theft from the that county drug task force. So that was a whole other case that so they were under investigation. Okay, doing some sketchy things. It was noted that some of the physical evidence was stored in paper bags from a store with the store's name printed on the bags instead of a typical evidence bag. There were just so many poor choices that were made here. Like, I don't understand. I just don't understand. In May of 1994, these three fellas appealed their convictions. The convictions were upheld on direct appeal. And in June of 96, Miss Kelly's lawyer, Dan Stidham, was preparing an appeal in the U.S. Supreme Court. In 07, Eccles petitioned for a retrial based on a statute permitting post-conviction testing of DNA evidence due to technological advances made since 1994, which might have provided exoneration for the wrongfully convicted. The petition did fail. The judge disallowed presentation of the information. And the ruling was thrown out by the Arkansas Supreme Court for all three defendants on November 4th of 2010. So let's take a moment and talk about John Mark Byers' knife, okay? Remember, John was the adoptive father of Christopher Byers, which is one of the victims. He gave a knife to a cameraman, Doug Cooper, who was working with documentary makers while filming the Paradise Lost Feather. So that's the documentary of this case, and he gave that to them while they were filming. I don't know why I felt the need to repeat that, but lo and behold, here we are, okay? The knife was a folding hunting knife manufactured by Kershaw. According to the statements given, Cooper said he received the knife on December 19th, 1993. After the documentary crew returned to New York, they reportedly discovered what appeared to be blood on the knife. So HBO executives ordered them to return the knife to the West Memphis Police Department, and they received that on January 8th of 94. That's December 19th to January 8th. It's a good little stint of time there, but regardless, Byers initially claimed the knife had never been used, but there was blood that was found on it, and Byers said that he had once used it to cut deer meat. Y'all, the blood ended up matching both John Mark and Chris's blood type. They told Byers this, and he was like, I have no idea how the blood might have gotten on the knife. That is sketchy as hell. During the interrogation, the police suggested that, maybe he had left the knife out accidentally and, he'd gotten hold of it, and Byers just kind of agreed to it, kind of brushed it off, agreed to it. And then later he said that he might have cut his thumb. Again, sketchy as hell. They did do further testing on the knife and the blood, but it came back inconclusive. There was still uncertainty surrounding the blood since both John Mark and Chris had the same HLA-DQA genotype. I do want to note that during the Filming to Paradise Lost 2 revelations, Byers did a polygraph test about the murders, and he did pass it. The documentary did indicate that Byers was under the influence of several psychoactive prescription medications, though, and that could have affected the results. But let me give y'all something else to chew on this, okay? Following the convictions of Eccles, Miss Kelly, and Baldwin, they each submitted imprints of their teeth, okay? The imprints were compared to the suspected bite marks on Stevie Branch's forehead. Also note, these marks were not mentioned in the original autopsy or the trial, but no matches were found. Their imprints did not match those bite marks. And isn't this interesting? John Mark Byers had his teeth removed in 1997 after the first trial, but before an imprint could be made. He gave contradictory stories as to why he had those teeth removed. First, he said that the seizure medication he took had caused periodontal disease. And then he said he had planned the removal because of a few other dental issues he had over the years. Little contradictory. Just add that to the list. Also, there was an expert who examined the autopsy photos and said that he thought there were imprints of a belt buckle on Byers' corpse. John Mark then said he had spanked his stepson shortly before he had disappeared. So here's some other little tidbits that I find interesting regarding this case that I just kind of threw together so that I could note those for y'all. So in 2007, DNA had been collected at the scene. DNA that had been collected at the scene was tested in 2007. None of the DNA matched Eccles, Baldwin, or Miss Kelly. There was a hair found as well, and it was said to not have been consistent with Steve Branch's stepfather, Terry Hobbs. The hair was found tied into the knots used to bind one of the victims. Even though none of the DNA matched, the prosecutors still stood by their convictions, which is, again, odd. Like, I don't understand that. But on May 5th of 2008, Pamela Hobbs came forward and said that after the murders, her sister and she found Stevie's knife that he had always carried with him, Stevie the victim. They found it in Terry's nightstand. She said that she couldn't believe that her husband had never mentioned that he had her son's knife. Yeah, that's weird. Pamela also told authorities that her sister told her that she had saw Terry wash clothes, bed linens, and curtains from Stevie's room at a really odd time right around the time of the murders. In 2013, Billy Wayne Stewart and Benny Guy gave written statements claiming that they had information on the case linking Terry Hobbs to the murders, but that they had told the police that, and it was completely ignored. So, like, they didn't even check into it. In July of 2008, it was revealed that Kent Arnold, the jury foreman on the Eccles Baldwin trial, had discussed the case with an attorney prior to the beginning of deliberations. Arnold was accused of advocating guilt on the West Memphis Three and sharing knowledge of inadmissible evidence. Yeah, no, you're not supposed to do that, bud. On October 29th of 2007, papers were filed in federal court by Eccles' defense lawyers seeking a retrial or his immediate release from prison. The filing cited that DNA evidence linking Terry Hobbs to the crime scene and the statements from Hobbs' now ex-wife. So yeah, I mean, it should cite that. On September 10th of 2008, Circuit Court Judge, Lord have mercy, what is wrong with me? David Burnett denied the request for a retrial, saying that the DNA tests were inconclusive. November 4th of 2010, the Arkansas Supreme Court ordered another judge to consider whether or not the newly analyzed DNA might exonerate the three. After weeks of negotiations, on August 19th of 2011, Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Kelly were released from prison as part of a plea deal, making the hearings ordered by the Arkansas Supreme Court completely unnecessary. Under the deal, the judge vacated the previous convictions, including the capital murder convictions for Eccles and Baldwin, and ordered a new trial. Each man entered an Alford plea to lesser charges of first and second degree murder while verbally stating their innocence. The judge then sentenced them to time served, a total of 18 years and 78 days, and they were each given a suspended imposition of sentence for 10 years. If they reoffend, they can be sent back to prison for 21 years. There have been a number of films, books, songs, and stories written about the case. I'm honestly torn on this case because part of me thinks that these guys could have gotten away with like heinous murder, but then there's the other part of me that feels like there's so much more to the story. I really feel like Hobbs' stepdad had something to do with this. That the Hobbs stepdad, yeah, if I could get my sentences right, that'd be great. It is really scary to think about how we don't even know the people that we surround ourselves with every day. It is genuinely terrifying, honestly. But that is all I have for you today. I do appreciate y'all listening to me and being here with me tonight. I will get this posted for y'all. Y'all give me some feedback. Let me know if you have a case that you want to go over. You remember, you can throw that in the comments, or you can email it to sweetteaandcrime1, that's the number 1 at gmail.com. And I will talk to y'all next week. Y'all have a good day.